Thank you, Dianata. Okay, so so today I'm going to be exploring just some of another aspect of an important life event of the Buddha. So I'll focus on the first few weeks of after his enlightenment, and hopefully draw out a few points that might be relevant to us on this retreat as well. So we heard last night about the enlightenment itself, and I'm going to talk about an event that people think is even more important than the enlightenment itself, even more sort of, important to us Buddhists than when the Buddha gained enlightenment. But I won't say what it is yet. So, before we go into what it was, we have to ask, now the world's got a Buddha on its hands, yeah? So, what do we do? What do we do with the Buddha on our hands? How is that relevant to us? So we can go back to, what Adityabandhu was saying, go back to the Bodhi tree. And the Buddha spent another week in its vicinity just gazing at the tree, just taking it in, appreciating it. So it's said that the nature of enlightenment is to communicate itself, yeah? So that's what he does. So at first the Buddha starts to communicate, the enlightenment experience starts to communicate itself. At first it communicates itself to himself. So picking up from what Adityabandhu was saying yesterday, and actually using the same quote, but a different translation, I'll read the Buddha's sort of vigorous exhortation after reaching enlightenment. So he says, "Many a house of life hath held me, seeking ever him who wrought these prisons of the senses. Sorrow fraught, sore was my ceaseless strife. But now, thou builder of this tabernacle, thou, I know thee, never shalt thou build again these walls of pain, nor raise the roof tree of deceits, nor lay fresh rafters on the clay. Broken thy house is, and thy ridgepoles split. Delusion fashioned it. Safe pass I thence, deliverance to obtain." So basically what the Buddha's saying is, great, I'm free, I've made it, it's just an exaltation. So what happens is there's a huge upsurge of energy, a huge upsurge of inspiration, energy, emotion. He's just completed his quest, his 6-year quest that he started, has come to its conclusion in enlightenment. So, we can imagine we've been here for maybe 8 days, maybe 3 days, and we can already notice a sort of change, a regalvanization of our energies over that amount of time. So imagine 6 years of striving. Imagine how much energy just, how much energy is just worked up, and how much now is released. So and then he reflects on what he has to do next. What is he going to do next? And he thinks he needs to communicate this now outwardly. But knowing what we're like, knowing what humans are like, he says, oh no. He says, this Dharma, this truth, is just so hard to perceive. It's subtle. We're enmeshed in craving. How is anybody going to understand what I'm trying to, or my own experience? This enlightenment, how is anyone going to sort of understand it? He says, "But if I were to teach Dharma and others were not to understand me, that would be a weariness to me. That would be a vexation to me." It's going to be really hard work, basically. So what he does is he feels inclined not to communicate enlightenment. He thinks it's too hard, it's too difficult. So yeah, it kind of, in one way it shows that he also had to think, he also had to make decisions, he had to weigh things up. He knew now he had to dedicate his life, although he kind of was, but he had to dedicate his life to expounding the Dharma. And I mean, we can imagine in our lives how difficult, how difficult it would be to just dedicate our lives to one thing completely, utterly, and go through with it. So he knows it's going to be hard work. But again, it's better to read this poetically. It's not that he had huge doubts and that he was all over the shop and he didn't really know. He just more understood the subtlety and the difficulty of communicating the real truth, and as we heard, how strong the pull of Mara is. So, up shows Brahma Sahampati, the Lord of the gods, and he felt terrified at this prospect of the Buddha not teaching. He thought that the whole world would perish, even though it might do well materially. The heart of the world, the spiritual progress of the world, it wouldn't happen, yeah? So the whole world would perish. There'd be a spiritual decline, but a material progression, perhaps. And I think we might be able to relate to that. I mean, I can relate to that in my own life. And I was saying at lunch, I was just talking a bit about my experience coming across the Dharma. In a way, I was doing quite well in my life. I was kind of progressing in my career. I was doing better and better. I was in a relationship that was okay. I mean, it was fine. So all my usual, all the things that we think will fulfill us, it didn't kind of work. And really, I just remember kind of walking home from work, you know, around this time of year when it was really dark, and just thinking, oh God, is this it? You know, it was dark and bleak, and I was sort of internally, there was something dark and bleak as well, because I didn't have the spiritual dimension of my life wasn't alive, yeah? So I had progressed materially, but not spiritually. So Brahma Sahampati, he begged the Buddha, he entreated the Buddha to teach the truth, and he said, please teach the truth to those whose eyes are covered but with little dust. So the Buddha, there taking that in, looks out, surveys the land with his Buddha eye, and has a vision of lotuses. A lotus is growing in a lake. And what the Buddha saw was a mass of humanity to be like these lotuses, this pond of lotuses. So the vast majority of them were stuck right down in the mud, submerged in the water, closed off to anything around them. Some of them were just coming out, just penetrating out the water, just managing to peek through. And just a few of them were standing bright, open in the air, open to the brilliance of the sun. So the Buddha reflected that these lotuses, or that humans are like lotuses at different stages of development. We're on different stages of the path. Some people are stuck in the mud. Others are breaking through the surface of the water. Others are standing out. And he also saw at the same time, we all have the same potential for enlightenment. So we're all, as it were, made of the same stuff. So it's beautiful imagery, isn't it? Natural, receptive images of flowers. So one point is, of course, anyone who does make the effort can gain enlightenment. And, we are at different stages, and we kind of have to accept that. And, of course, we're in different stages, partly due to our conditioning, our upbringing, things of that nature. At the same time, anyone who's receptive, like the lotus, anyone who's receptive can gain enlightenment. But the lotus that's stuck in the mud, shut, can represent kind of a smaller, closed mind, closed heart. So the deeper one's in the water, the less receptive one is. And we can often, say in beginner's class, when we first come along to the LBC or maybe here, and we first come across the Dharma, we can really feel ourselves to be receptive, to be open. And, in my own experience, again, after I'm meeting the Dharma, after I found it, I went to the LBC, that was one of my experiences. I just felt really absorbed, really taking in all the Dharma talks. I think that's one of the signs for me. So I was kind of surprised in a way, because I'd always grown up. When I was growing up, at school I never felt particularly engaged, sort of sitting in a class and hearing teachings. And actually going to the LBC, it kind of reminded me of when I used to go and watch football games, where I'd be really absorbed, I'd be really interested. And it was like I was starved of something, starved of the Dharma, it felt like. Particularly in the first few months, I was just taking it all in. So that's the sort of receptivity we can have, we can feel. So after this, after communicating enlightenment to himself, he then focuses outwards and he makes another decisive decision. And then referring to those with little dust in their eyes, he says, "Open to them are the doors of the deathless." So, in other words, anyone who makes the effort to gain enlightenment can reach it. And so he decides to teach. So, who's he going to teach? He's decided to teach. Who's it going to be? So he thinks, okay, there's my two teachers. Actually, first he thinks of his most senior teacher that he had back in his ascetic days, Alara the Kalama. He said, he's going to be receptive, he's going to be wise, he's experienced. At that moment, knowledge and vision arose, as the scriptures say, and he knew that Alara Kalama, just 7 days previously, had passed away. He said, okay, Ramaputra, my other teacher. Again, knowledge and vision arose. Ramaputra died only 1 day before. So it's quite a coincidence, isn't it? And the point isn't that if you're the Buddhist teacher, you're probably going to die. I mean, that's not the point. The point is that you have to be receptive to be grateful. Yeah, so the Buddha has obviously surpassed his teachers, but he's grateful. He's grateful for those teachers, even though he surpassed them. It kind of reminds me a little bit of when I spend time with my family. And I'll get to why. So I think when we practice more, our gratitude to the closest people in our lives does just come up. And I know for me that's definitely been the case with my parents. So in a way, we might even think, they're flawed, or we might even have done better than them. But they are still the reason that we're here. And we also know the feeling of ingratitude, don't we? When we feel just that inner poverty, we feel a bit isolated, we feel like we can't give what we want to give in the world. So that feeling of gratitude, of openness, does make us receptive. And of course, when we're grateful, we want to share our experience with other people. When we hear a bit of good news or whatever, the first thing we want to do is to just tell the closest people to us. So the Buddha was obviously receptive, and he wasn't just receptive to all human beings, he was receptive to all living beings. As I said at the beginning, he spent a whole week under the Bodhi tree, just gazing, after his enlightenment, just gazing at it. So in a way, we can think back to the communication exercises, can't we? When we just did the gazing, just the eye gazing. And that's a communication, definitely. So the Buddha was receptive to all beings, not just human beings, all living beings. Okay, so Brahmaputra and Alara the Kalama, he can't teach them. Who's he going to teach? So he thinks back at the days when he was a wandering ascetic, just like we heard from Dhyanatta, the days where he practiced severe austerities, he starved himself, and he remembered his 5 companions, his fellow practitioners. So he says, okay, I'm going to teach them. They're alive, I'm going to teach them. So he heads off to the deer park at Isipatana. On his way there, he comes across Upaka, who's another wandering holy man. And Upaka, just like they used to do in those days in India, he'd ask 2 questions. So Upaka asked the Buddha, who's your teacher and whose teachings do you profess? And the Buddha here, he just completely self-confidently says, victorious over all, omniscient am I, among all things undefiled, leaving all through death or craving freed. By knowing myself, whom should I point to? For me there is no teacher. One like me does not exist. In the world with its devas, no one equals me. For I am perfected in the world. A teacher supreme am I. I alone am all awakened. Become cool am I, Nibbana attained. To turn the Dharma wheel, I go to Kasi's city, beating the drum of the deathlessness, in a world that's blind become. So he's very self-confident here. But he's just making a simple statement of fact because he knows what he's overcome, he knows what he has to do, and he knows what he's going to do. So there's no sense of false humility, false pride. No, he just knows. So Upaka responds, am I hearing this right? You're saying that you're a conqueror, you've attained nirvana, is that what you said? Are you sure? And the Buddha says again, like me, they are victors indeed, who have won destruction of the cankers. Vanquished by me are evil things. Therefore, Upaka, am I a victor? And then Upaka says, okay, yeah, maybe. He shakes his off and he shakes his head and he just heads off on the bypath. So he completely doesn't take in or doesn't well, he's just not receptive. So in a way, we can probably see ourselves a bit like Upaka, can't we? We're suddenly confronted by the truth in whatever way it is. We're confronted by this big image of the Buddha, and then we consider it for a while. We think, oh yeah, this could change my life. This is something. And then we just go off on our own little bypath, missing an opportunity. And yeah, I've certainly experienced this actually in my time at the LBC as well. We people come and they're really excited, and the first few weeks, maybe a couple of months, it's all good, and maybe they were feeling like how I said I was feeling, like really absorbed, taking it all in, and then they disappear, and they don't kind of follow through, as it were. Keep the receptivity, keep growing, really. Keep progressing on the path. So anyway, the Buddha, of course, he wasn't deterred, He was on the way to the deer park for the 5 ascetics. So when he arrived, the 5 ascetics saw him from a distance, and they thought, no. There's Gautama. Remember, he took solid food. Let's just ignore him. And as he came closer, when he arrived, they couldn't help but rise from their seats. They couldn't help but take his arms or his begging bowl, take it from him, relieve him of his begging bowl, make a seat for him, and sit on his side. They couldn't help but be reverent. So, he then said, oh guys, by the way, I've reached enlightenment. I have conquered my mind. And they were stubborn, so they said, no, you definitely haven't. You took the easy route, didn't you? You were doing this self-mortification thing, and then you kind of stopped, and you're not enlightened, basically. And he said, no, I have. And if you follow my teachings, you'll also be enlightened. And they thought, maybe. They said, no, probably not. No, definitely not. You kind of went soft, didn't you? It's like, no. Trust me. Trust me. I've done what I've needed to do, and I'm enlightened. If you hear what I have to say, you too will be enlightened. And then one more time, they said, no, that can't be true. So after the third time, the Buddha says, and he says this, do you allow, monks, that I have ever spoken to you like this before? And they respond, you have not, Lord. So I really like that, because it's like when we're talking to a friend and they're not quite sure if we're telling the truth. And then we say, no, this is true. And they can't but respond to us. They can't but say, oh yeah, okay. He's or she's, they're telling the truth. I'm going to listen. Okay, so they're on side now. So he started teaching. And in effect, what the Buddha was teaching was the first Buddhist retreat 2,500 years ago. As Suragupta says, 2,500 years ago, the first retreat. So that just means the Buddha got to know them. He got to see what stage of the development they were at. He got to see what they needed to progress. He entered into a real, alive communication with them. Some sort of communication more similar to what we've been trying to experience and what we might have experienced around here, maybe in the communication exercises. Yeah, we've seen that power, haven't we, of the communication exercises. We see how we are with others. We see the sort of gap between ourselves and others. We see what we're putting on other people. And then there's a little thing in between, a little bit of communication, or maybe a bit of communication. When we enter into that, then our whole world is quite more pregnant with meaning, isn't it? So that's real communication. So he entered into communication with people. Actually, one stat on communication, you might know this, but there's a rule of communication called the 7-38-55. And this rule means that the 7% of meaning is communicated through the spoken word, 38% through the tone of our voice, and 55% through body language. So it might not come as a surprise to all of us that that's the case. It certainly wasn't for me. As Dianata said, I didn't grow up, I was born here, but my family are Portuguese. And so I grew up with two different languages, sort of straddling two different languages. So in a way, the words that I used, there was sort of meaning beyond those words because I had two different sets of words to use. So I had to kind of feel the meaning, as it were. And my brother and I, when we were young, we made up our own language, the way that you do, young children do. So our language was we would replace the beginning of each word with the letter Z and then talk really quickly. So only him and I would understand this language. And we'd go really, really quickly and in a way, sometimes we didn't really know what each other said, but we kind of got it by the way we were moving ourselves and talking. We understood each other through our body language and through our tone of voice. But yeah, it's very different to how we communicate now, isn't it? We have more of or we can do when we have our phones. We're just a bit more used to sort of superficial level communication. And communication that can lead to sort of misunderstandings, divisiveness, echo chambers of thought. And that was one of the things people said here. It's like, they're just relieved to be off their phones. It's like, actually, I am relieved to be off it. We think we really want it, but when we don't have it, we're relieved. So the point is, most of what we communicate is through who we are, how we act, what we do, what we exemplify. So we can't be like Upaka. We have to be like the ascetics. There's a Sangharakshitara founder, he gave an example of the retreat, on a retreat team being an exemplification of something more, of this kind of, well, it's just an exemplification of something positive, I think. So we can see that, how people work together on a retreat team, how they communicate, the sort of connection they have. That often is what strikes people the most, actually, on retreats. It might not be their own mental states, it might not be the food, good though it is, very good, but often it is just the retreat team, how they work together, the exemplification. So actually, in the oldest version of the story, of this story, in the Majjhima Nikaya, the book of middle-length sayings, we're not actually told what the Buddha taught. As in, we're not told what teaching he gave the ascetics. So we're not told that he expounds the 4 this or the 8 that. So what he first taught remains a mystery, which is very suggestive, isn't it? Because he's teaching the 5 ascetics, but he could be teaching anyone. And then he's teaching them then, 2,500 years ago, but he's teaching us now on this retreat. That's to say, this teaching, this Dharma, it can't be reduced to a specific formula, a set of doctrine. We can't have all the sort of formulas nicely written down and then saying, oh yeah, we've got Buddhism. We can't do that. The teaching is, as the Buddha says, whatever conduces to enlightenment, whatever helps you grow. And there are many different ways that we can grow, many different ways we can develop, as we know from this retreat. We can do that through meditation, through philosophizing as an activity of the mind, through puja. And I want to give one personal example, and there's someone in the room that I will be talking about positively. It's an example of my friend David Mitra, and an issue that I had in my own practice. So about 1.5 years ago, I was struggling in meditation. I was basically finding it really very dry, and I couldn't really, I would sit down for ages on end and nothing would happen. It was just coming up against just real dryness. And I went on retreat, and this was happening again. It was a 2-week retreat. It kept happening. And part of the retreat was a devotional practice that it's kind of like the puja, but it's a bit more, well, actually, you're giving devotion to the people that we perceive as more advanced of us. It's called a prostration practice. It's an advanced practice. Anyway, we started doing this in the retreat, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. My meditation was really dry, but this devotional practice was really alive. And I felt like my heart's in it again, because that's what we want in meditation. We want to feel like our heart's in it. Otherwise, what's the point? So I was doing this practice, and I was doing meditation, very different. So I got back home, and I live with David Mitra, and I went on a walk with him, and I said, David Mitra, meditation isn't working for me, but I really enjoy this other practice. But David Mitra, we have to meditate, don't we? We're Buddhists. We have to meditate every day. We have to do these things that make our mind better. And he said, just forget about meditation for now. Just do the prostration practice. It's working. Do it. And just him saying that, allowing me to, or in a way imbibing the spirit of Buddhism, the spirit of the Dharma, showing that the teaching can't be reduced to these formula, to these doctrines, set of doctrines, that it has to be to whatever conduces to growth. That, in a way, I suppose I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that, really. It got bits of me that were not quite in the picture, kind of behind me, just into the picture. Got my heart into the picture. Got more of me into the picture. More of me meditating, more of me living my life, more of me alive. So as our founder says, as Bhante says, Bhante Sangharakshita, the Dharma is caught, not taught. So back to the Buddha. He's developing these friendships, this communication with the 5 ascetics. And in a way, I'm just going to read this little passage out. I think it's lovely, just showing what happens on this retreat. So this is like a 10-week retreat, 11-week retreat that he had with the monks. And he's just describing their day-to-day, going for alms in the town. So they'd go and get food in the town. It says, monks. Now I exhorted 2 monks. 3 monks walked for alms food. Whatever the 3 monks who had walked for alms food brought back, that group of 6 lived on. And then, monks, I exhorted 3 monks. 2 monks walked for alms food. Whatever the 2 monks who had walked for alms food brought back, that the group of 6 lived on. So it's just very simple, isn't it? It's like, this is what we're doing. It just reminded me of the job rota on this retreat. It's like, oh, this day we'll do that. We'll do the washing up. The next day we'll make the shrines. So in a way, it's just a nice sort of practical example. So just to finish off, what happens when this process of growth and development unfolds is that we come to find ourselves more and more in contact with those people who are developing themselves, i.e. all of us. And eventually we weave these sort of network of relationships, of friendships, with those people who are just on different stages of the path. And then eventually we form a spiritual community, and we're united by a common ideal, a common goal. And so, traditionally speaking, that is when the Buddha gained full enlightenment. It was when he was able to successfully communicate to other people the importance of the truth. Eventually, after at the end of the retreat, and don't expect it on this retreat, but at the end of this retreat, the 5 ascetics gained enlightenment, and the Buddha was able to successfully teach, transmit, and show what enlightenment was. Okay.
Thank you very, very much, Adityabandhu. I really felt like when you were saying enlightenment community,